Are we living in one of the most tumultuous times in recent American history? With issues ranging from inflation to international conflicts, many Americans feel they're living through crisis after crisis. But how did we get here? Let's dive into 11 major challenges that have emerged under President Joe Biden's administration. From soaring prices to military upheaval, President Joe Biden's term has been marked by a series of crises, some of which are unprecedented in recent history. This video explores the key incidents that have defined his presidency, controversies, policies, and the outcomes that have shaped America today. 11. He presided over a plethora of disasters of Joe Biden. This year, under Biden's leadership, our nation saw the worst inflation in 40 years, the biggest drop in real wages in 40 years, the highest gas prices in American history, the largest annual increase in food prices since 1979, labor shortages of crisis proportions, and the worst wave of crime in many cities since the 1990s. No president since Jimmy Carter has caused so many disasters at once. 10. Called Georgia's Law. Jim Crow 2.0. Despite Biden's ugly and false claim, early voting shattered Georgia's record for midterm elections, with black voters accounting for 29% of early voters. Biden owes Georgia an apology. This turnout defied accusations of suppression and indicated that voters were as engaged as ever. Given the high participation, critics argue that Biden owes the people of Georgia an apology for casting the law in such a harsh light. 9. Promoted GOP extremists in primaries. Democrats spent tens of millions of dollars supporting MAGA candidates in GOP primaries, hoping they would be easier to defeat. One of the most cynical, immoral political strategies in memory. The calculated strategy aimed to boost extreme opponents they deemed easier to defeat in the general election. Many saw this as one of the most cynical moves in recent memory, appearing to prioritize short-term political gains over genuine bipartisan cooperation. 8. Discharged troops over vaccine refusal. The Army fell short of its recruitment goals by 25%, or 15,000 soldiers this year, and Pentagon officials warned of the worst military recruitment crisis since the inception of the volunteer service. Yet more than 3,000 experienced battle-hardened troops were needlessly forced out. 7. Pleaded for foreign oil production. Biden lifted sanctions and allowed Chevron to produce and export Venezuelan oil again, and he begged OPEC to produce more, all while leasing fewer acres of federal land for oil and gas drilling than any president since the end of World War II. The reliance on foreign oil sources appeared at odds with Biden's climate goals and commitments to strengthen energy independence. 6. Attempted unconstitutional student loan cancellation. His order, hung up in the courts, would force blue-collar workers to subsidize the higher education of white-collar professionals by using a 9/11-era law intended to help service members called up to active duty avoid default. Critics argue that this would force blue-collar workers to subsidize the education costs of white-collar professionals. 5. Failed to respond to Kabul bombing. Biden warned those who carried out the 2021 attack, "We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay." But since the U.S. withdrawal more than a year ago, there have been no over-the-horizon strikes against the ISIS-K terrorists responsible. This unfulfilled commitment has drawn criticism, with some arguing it signals a lack of accountability and resolve. 4. Passed ineffective Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, a bill aimed at combating inflation and climate change. Despite its title, economic analysis has suggested the act will have a nearly negligible effect on inflation, and its projected impact on climate change is similarly minimal. Some believe this massive climate spending bill falls short of its promises, sparking debates over its effectiveness and whether the funding was appropriately allocated. 3. He made the worst border crisis in U.S. history even worse. In fiscal 2022, there were almost 2.4 million encounters at the southern border, plus more than 600,000 known gotaways, and 98 people on the terrorist watch list were stopped near the border. More than 800 migrants died crossing the border illegally. Yet when asked why he had not visited the border, Biden said he had more important things going on. 2. Delayed Ukraine aid fearing Putin. For months before Russia invaded, Biden declined Ukraine's requests for critical defense weapons like Stinger and Javelin missiles. Once Russia attacked, he initially offered President Zelensky an escape route, but Zelensky famously replied, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Even then, Biden delayed military support, forcing Ukraine to rely on outdated Soviet-era equipment. He also blocked Poland from sending MiG-29 jets to Ukraine, worried stronger support might trigger a larger war. It took over 9 months for Biden to deliver one Patriot air defense system, during which time Russian attacks devastated Ukrainian schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Later, even as the US provided HIMARS rocket systems, they were limited to prevent Ukraine from launching longer-range strikes. Biden continues to hold back long-range missiles and M1 Abrams tanks, fearing these could escalate the conflict. Frustrated, a Ukrainian reporter recently asked Biden, "Can we just give Ukraine everything it needs to end the war sooner?" With his current approach, Biden is accused of prolonging the conflict, which has led to countless civilian casualties and delayed a definitive end to Russian aggression. 1. Biden's failure in Afghanistan. The Biden administration's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan left behind American citizens and allies to face the wrath of the Taliban. The fiasco will embolden jihadi terrorists. America's competitors and adversaries have also taken notice. In the past month, China has increased its threatening rhetoric toward Taiwan. Russia and Iran likely look at this botched withdrawal as a sign of America's waning international influence. Abandoning our citizens and partners, President Joe Biden said on August 18th, "If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay to get them all out." Our armed forces and diplomatic community undertook a heroic effort to meet that commitment, and tragically, 13 service members lost their lives during the president's hasty retreat while many more were wounded. Despite their efforts, when the last U.S. plane took off from the Kabul airport on August 30th, it left behind around 200 U.S. citizens trying to escape, including children. Many of those who were abandoned could not make it to the airport because the Taliban blocked their access. U.S. weapons in Taliban hands. The Biden administration has yet to provide Congress with a clear plan to account for the military equipment left behind when the Taliban overtook Afghan forces. This gear includes combat vehicles, aircraft, night vision, advanced surveillance equipment, and high-powered weapons. Taliban fighters have been seen wearing Western body armor, using night vision goggles, and carrying M4 carbines. Some experts worry that these weapons may end up with Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. Ironically, the administration recently arrested 2 Americans for attempting to smuggle similar equipment to Russia, highlighting the security risk of advanced technology now controlled by the Taliban. Future of counterterrorism in the region. President Biden has argued that withdrawing troops from Afghanistan won't compromise counterterrorism operations, thanks to an over-the-horizon strategy using missiles and drones. This approach mirrors President Clinton's 1998 response to Al-Qaeda's Africa embassy bombings, which included missile strikes in Afghanistan and sanctions targeting the Taliban to pressure them into expelling Al-Qaeda. Despite these efforts, Al-Qaeda remained and eventually orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. Now, both Al-Qaeda and ISIS have a foothold in Afghanistan, and ISIS recently targeted U.S. forces during the Kabul airport attack on August 26th. Abandoning NATO allies. The rapid abandonment of Afghanistan has the potential to do incredible damage to U.S. standing with our NATO allies. Directly after the September 11th attacks on the U.S., NATO invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty for the first time in history. With this, our NATO allies and non-NATO partners contributed thousands of troops and billions of dollars toward the efforts in Afghanistan. NATO allies and G7 leaders pressured President Biden to stay in Kabul longer so the evacuation could be done more safely, but they were forced to leave when the U.S. pulled out on August 30th. Biden's blame game. The Biden administration has placed the responsibility for Afghanistan's fall on the prior administration, which reached an agreement with the Taliban to withdraw U.S. troops in exchange for counterterrorism cooperation and a reduction in violence. However, President Biden has reversed several of his predecessors' policies on immigration and other issues, even extending the original withdrawal deadline from May to September. Critics argue that the administration has not convincingly explained why this particular agreement could not be reconsidered. Dealing with the devil. The Taliban announced a new government on September 7th. This government, comprised of Taliban hardliners, members of a U.S.-designated terror group, and former Guantanamo detainees, demonstrates the country's bleak future and the threat a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan still poses. The new Interior Minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani, is head of the Haqqani Network, a designated terror group affiliated with Al-Qaeda. The State Department is offering a $10 million reward for information leading to his arrest. From domestic crises to international challenges, President Biden's administration has faced immense hurdles. Whether in economic policy, energy independence, or foreign relations, each decision has sparked debate, reshaping America's position on the world stage and its impact at home. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know in the comments what you think about these issues. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis.